Okay, so we don't need slides for a start because this is a story conference and I'm going to tell a story. So in the year 2002, I arrived in Moscow with my young family, three boys. This was just after Mr. Vladimir Putin was made the president of Russia. And my job was to sell software to the Russian oil and gas company. And Schlumberger, that was the company that I was working with, was already working in Russia, doing some good business there. And it was my job to connect with mostly the newly privatized Russian oil companies and see if I could persuade them to buy our software. And while I was there, I remember telling a story, and it was a story about Schlumberger in Russia. And I will tell you that story, and then I will explain the effect of that story. So when Schlumberger today Schlumberger is a massive company, a more than $30 billion revenue company. But in 1927, when they started, they were a startup company, started up in France, and one of the very first countries in the world to accept their technology, and it was electronic technology for finding out where the oil is in an oil well. And one of the first countries to accept that technology was the former Soviet Union, Russia and the former Soviet states. So Schlumberger was successful, operating all through the Soviet Union, and their company was growing. And then in the 1930s, their company was nationalized by Stalin. And all the equipment was taken by the Soviet Union, and they had to leave the Soviet Union. And fortunately for Schlumberger, they managed to get their business going in Texas, in the United States, and still the company was growing very well. But in the 1990s, just before I moved to Russia, Schlumberger had to make a decision. Do they go back into Russia or not after that bad experience? So the strategy guys took a business case to the CEO, and they asked the CEO, how much money are you willing to risk going back into Russia? And he said $200 million. So Schlumberger invested that money, putting a lot of expert people and technology in Russia, and they worked with two of the newly privatized Russian oil companies. And after 18 months, they doubled the oil production of those two companies, even while the oil production in general was going down in Russia at that time. So I used to tell that story to my Russian and international oil clients in Russia. And then I started to hear other clients tell me that story back, which meant my story was traveling from place to place. So I knew that that story was doing work. I knew that story was doing some persuasion work. And that's one of the first times that I really noticed that stories can actually help you. They can help you in your business conversations. Okay, so I'm on the next slide. Why stories? There's quite a few reasons why we should tell stories. And the first one is, this is showing you the whole thing. The first thing, this is a little experiment that was done in 2009 on eBay by some writers, by a collection of writers in the United States. What they did was they purchased very inexpensive items from eBay, less than $1, and then the writers wrote stories about each of those items, and then they put them back on eBay again to sell them again. So now you see the items that were $1 sold for $41, or an item that was 50 cents sold for $62. The only difference was the story. I'm not recommending that you make up your stories, but I am saying that if you have a story with the thing that you're selling, it can be much more valuable to the buyer. Okay, next slide. Well, sorry, I'm supposed to do it. Not wanting to go right. Okay. And this slide here shows you the item that made the most money, purchased for 99 cents, sold for $157. So we say at Anecdote, the company I work at, that the best sellers are storytellers. And we notice when we're working with our clients that the very best salespeople are the ones that tell stories, even if they don't notice that they're telling them. You notice that the picture at the beginning of my presentation had a picture of an elephant and a rider. The rider represents rational, logical argument, and the elephant represents emotional feeling, an emotional argument. And we know that to make a decision, humans need to make a decision based on their emotion, not based on the rational argument. But the great thing about stories is that we can pass a rational argument and an emotional argument all in the same story, all in one story. So these are three characteristics of stories. They're memorable. Normally, if you hear a story at a presentation, that's the thing you'll remember about the whole presentation, because our brains are wired to remember stories easily. They're multi-sensory. They use multiple senses. So I hear a story with my ears, but then I imagine what it would look like. I imagine what I would see, and I imagine what I would feel. So the story allows me to see and feel what's happening, even though I only hear it through my ears. And stories are what we call a pull strategy. Rather than tell our client what we have to do, we can put the information in a story and they pull that information in, and it's much easier for them and it's not confrontational. The first type of story that I told was a connection story at the beginning about me and what happened when I went to Russia with my family. And there are different types of connection stories. We can tell connection stories about ourselves personally. We can tell stories about our company, and we can tell stories about other people in our organization. They're all connection stories. And the idea of a connection story is to show the listener that you are like them, that you're a normal human, and that they should trust you. Now I'm going to move on to the types of stories that help sell the change, help convince your client that they should change, because that's what selling is all about. Selling is about making change. And the emotional elephant, of course, doesn't like change, so we have to be careful with change. The first story pattern, we call a clarity pattern, is used to explain why your client should change. It's a simple time narrative, and we say, in the past, it was like this, and then something happened to change things. So now we need to do this new thing, and in the future, it's going to be like this. And then we need to add some little detail to our story. We call them moments, so that the listener can put themselves in the story and they can understand the story. I'm not going to give an example of this story because we don't have enough time. I'm going to move on to the next type of story. This is probably the most important type of story or pattern for salespeople. And it starts by talking about don't tell a story about another client that succeeded with your products and services. You're going to tell that story to a buyer, to a prospective client. And the right way to start this story is to start by telling your prospect client about that other client and the problem that they have. So we start here, bottom left, and we talk about that client and their problem. We don't talk about our company and our products. Then we explain how they meet us, and our company is the guide. And then we explain about the plan that we made with our client, how we avoided failure, and how we achieved success. Okay, I'm going to give an example of one of our anecdote success stories so that you can see the pattern in action. So we have a client that has, it's a data analytics company. It has about 10,000 staff. They have many thousands of salespeople. And the senior management of this company, they think that their salespeople are technically very good at meeting the technical people in their client organization, but they're not so good at meeting the business people in the client organization. They're not so comfortable to meet the business people. And they feel like that's costing them business. They're not making as much business as they should because of that problem. So now I'm at this point here. One of their salespeople attended a training course with Anecdote in Australia and went back to the United States and told the management about that course when back in the headquarters in San Diego in the United States. So the head of training at that company reached out to Anecdote, and our founder, Sean Callahan, when he was in the United States, went and met the client in San Diego. I think you're already listening to Sean Callahan on a different session. And then as they were talking, Michelle, the lady who's running the organizational training for our client, she said to Sean, "Aha, I see what you're doing. You're telling stories. I get it. I see exactly what you're doing." And they set about making a plan to see if they could teach internally the people in our client to deliver our training course, to deliver our story-powered sales training course. Michelle, the lady who was running the training for that company, she was concerned that maybe their salespeople wouldn't accept storytelling, that they might think it's a little bit too not hard-nosed, not serious. They might worry that it's not serious. And she was worried that if it wasn't customized to their business, it might be too general. But we implemented the training, and it's been running for 2 years now. It has the highest promoter score of any training course in that company. And there's been a clear improvement in the sales results. So that's the success story pattern. So it started by telling you about our client and what was the problem they had. I explained how they met our company and how we made a plan. And then I told you what objections our client had that we had to work around, how it could have gone wrong maybe, and then how we achieved success. Okay. And here's one way to remember how we position the client. So the client is like Luke Skywalker. Sorry about the cross here. You are not Luke. You, the salesperson, are not Luke Skywalker. You are Yoda in Star Wars. You're the Yoda. You're the guide, not the hero of the story. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about a type of story that can help you close the deal when the client is trying to work out how to make the decision to buy or not, and they're worried about risk. So one of the things they're concerned about is, will your company behave the right way after they sign the contract? And the story pattern that you can tell in this situation is called a value story. It's a story that describes how your company behaves, maybe when something goes wrong. What's the behavior of your company when things go wrong? How will you treat your client after the contract is signed? And I will give you a quick example from when I was working for Siemens, the German multinational company. I was with the CEO of Siemens Australia, and he took a telephone call from the Premier of the state in Australia where I work, which is the state of Victoria. It's a very serious phone call because Siemens was supplying electrical equipment for a cable that runs, an electrical cable that will run under the ocean from Australia to Tasmania, 400 kilometers cable under the ocean. Yeah, I'm from Tasmania. That's where I come from. And the ship that was bringing the equipment from Germany to Australia got caught in a big storm in the Southern Ocean off Australia. The rudder broke on the ship, and all the equipment, all of the Siemens equipment got smashed. It got broken and couldn't be used. And it takes 18 months to make this equipment. So the Premier was calling the CEO and asking him, what can you do? Because our project is going to be delayed. So the board had an emergency meeting in Germany, and they worked out how to construct this equipment in record time. In fact, they constructed new equipment in just 3 months, and the project had no delay. The project was delivered on time. So our Victorian government was happy, and today this cable is operating from Australia to Tasmania with all of the equipment working perfectly. It's an example of a value story. And when your client believes this kind of story, they're often willing to pay a higher price because they know that they're buying the quality and they're buying commitment to deliver. So that is close to the end of my talk. Just a word on ethics. We must always tell true stories. We don't make up the story or make up the events in a story. And if we tell somebody else's story, we always acknowledge the other person. We don't pretend that it's our story. And this is the way to do honest business. So that is the Story-Powered Sales. We offer training courses in this product. It's a 1-day course and 4 months of practice in storytelling. 4 months of practice to develop your own stories and to put your stories in a story bank so that you can share those stories with all of the people in your company. And that is the end of my presentation. Do I have one more slide? No. Thank you. Yeah, so please do connect with me on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And I would love an opportunity to come to Russia. I enjoyed my time living there for 2 years very much. До свидания.